Oh gosh, I got a cramp. What's going on, everybody? Meningitis Menace is back at it again, and we are in the stew. We in the stew, baby. Feeling a lot better today. It's good to see you guys, and we are going to a sensitive topic. So I want to say that before we even get started in here today, I want there to be an understanding of the sensitivity of this topic, and there's going to be some stuff that we need to get into because, again, I have learned that the details do matter. I think that's what changes, the entire reason why we talk about things is that we have to get into the full picture. So today I have some really important notes to give you. I do not want to spoil this, but I honestly do think you should consider watching this if you have ever kept up with Ruby Franke or Jodi Hildebrandt. Netflix just obviously came out with this, and they're kind of going from Jodi's perspective. So today's going to be our part one of probably two parts, where I want to really hit on these topics that I wrote down, because I don't want to skip over anything, and I don't want there to be kind of going through it too quickly. So what I'd like to do is kind of work on a part one and a part two, because these themes are kind of exactly what we discuss on this channel. I'm also going to make myself bigger because there's really nothing for you to see other than me. So hello. So here we go. Today we're getting into Evil Influencer, the Jodi Hildebrandt story. Now, there's a lot of people in this documentary. There are some family members, some members of Jodi's religious therapeutic group. Now, this is what's so interesting. This is where I still am baffled by what's happening in our world. And especially when it comes to religious culture and therapy, because these are places where you find solace. These are places where you're supposed to feel safe. These are places where you're supposed to feel okay. Colbert is in the studio. If you didn't know, Colby is short for Colbert. So, no, it's not. But somebody asked me that the other day, and it made me laugh, and now everybody thinks Colbert's the funniest thing ever. If you didn't see the Meningitis Menace in full suit, I posted that on the community tab. And yeah, Meningitis Menace, Colbert. We got a lot of new stuff going on over here on the channel. All right, so let's get right into it. I don't have anything to show you as of right now. I was going to make a slideshow for you. I just felt like it'd be easier to discuss it. I'm going to read your guys' messages, and we're going to go from there. So as we open into this documentary, the first thing we're going to see is there's a location. It's basically right outside of St. George. Well, what's insane to me is that I literally lived in St. George 3 different times in my life for a short amount of time. So I moved in. My best friend lived up there with his family, so I moved in with him 2 different times, I want to say, between the ages of 17 to 19. So that's kind of where I literally lived in St. George. So I know where this is. I know where these houses are. It's not that far away from St. George, Utah. So, and of all places, of course, Lori and Chad also were people who went to St. George. So St. George, if you don't know, I think has one of the most original LDS temples as far as how old it is. And it's very beautiful because it's white. And the red, St. George is very red rock. So it looks like it just stands out, and it's right in the middle. There's a lot of old structure in St. George. So that's kind of the setting that we're talking about today. So this documentary opens into, I just am going to call him the younger Franke brother, because I don't want to use his name because they don't use his name. So I really want there to be discretion here. But it opens back into the very hard moment, which is actually right here in this trailer, which we won't play, but it's a Ring doorbell camera of this young man escaping his bonds. And he got out of Jodi Hildebrandt's house, walked barefoot in the 100 degrees with his ankles and his hands had been bound, and walks up to the front door and politely asks if he could have some assistance. I mean, he's not freaking out. He just knows he's in the bad situation. He also doesn't really want his family to get in trouble. And this is where I need to hit on this before we even really start on anything, is that what's happening, what I'm seeing is the people that were getting involved with these religious cults have a way of making the person, the child even, or the people involved, as if they are at fault. So these cults are very good at breaking you down. And every time I watch this, it immediately just makes me get goosebumps, sick to my stomach, and just tears flood your eyes, because it's not easy to watch. And seeing this young man be brave enough to leave hell, that's what I would consider that is hell, and knock on a door and ask for help. So the cops come through, the detectives come through. They don't even know, because this is such a non-crime area, which again really does echo again with Lori and Chad, in a place that's LDS, that really also nothing really happens like this. So the detective, she even says, we didn't know if this call was even realistic. We didn't even know if this call was actually as bad as it sounds. She even said, are kids playing games, and maybe one of them did something with duct tape. Like, they just didn't even know the legitimacy. So the cops show up, the detectives show up, and they see this young man who has been completely malnourished, who's as skinny as a rail, who's been literally held captive in a few houses down at Jodi Hildebrandt's mansion. This is a huge compound, so it's like a $5 million house. And I wrote down right here, my first thought is that Jodi and Chad both inflicted pain to the other kids and not their own. So first thing that came to my mind when I see this time is Jodi and Chad Daybell both inflicted pain on the partner's children, not their own children. And they always did it when they were way, way younger, vulnerable, and basically they could take advantage of it. So the thematic points between these two cases it's scary. It genuinely is scary, because now that I know what's happened with Lori's and Chad's trial, and I heard these things, to echo any of that is just, it's terrifying. Any kind of echoing, any kind of repeating, any kind of anything scares me. And this is why we do a lot of this on this channel, is to bring, what's the word? Not even just awareness, but like almost like, let's make sure that this doesn't keep repeating itself. And if you see these kinds of things, we need to find a way to somehow, some way stop these things before they start. So we're going to get into a lot of the cult leader aspects as well. I have seen that Jodi's family member has interviewed as well, so I'm definitely interested in if we can ever have a conversation with somebody that they can tell us the reality, because that's what the whole point of this channel is, to also give other victims a platform where they're not edited and they're not put into a box or basically have to tell the story a certain way. I want them to feel free to say it the way that it really truly was. So they searched Jodi's house, and then so this is like the pacing of the documentary. It starts right at the beginning, which is interesting, because the last one that we covered when we talked about the Ruby Franke Hulu documentary, which was called The Devil in the Family, this didn't happen till the end, because we spent most of the time with the family figuring out about the 9 Passengers YouTube channel and all these things. And again, this is a mom who's LDS in an LDS dominated population, and is being shown to be this great mom, right? And then this is where we end up. So they go into Jodi's house. They pull her out. She's on the phone with her lawyer, and she has some papers folded in her chest. So she knows that something's going on when she sees police. So I always think about the psychology of, what the hell are you thinking? And you know what's about to happen. So the police are like, pull her out. She's literally at the door. She's like, do you have a search warrant? And they pull her right out, and they go in, and they are in this mansion. They're searching all these rooms, and they find Ruby Franke's daughter with her. Man, it's hard to talk about, because just the state of everything. Ruby Franke's daughter is in a closet, sitting crisscross applesauce by herself, with these low lit things in a closet. And I know I said that, but understand, a closet in a bathroom off inside of a room. So basically 3 doors away if they were all shut. And she's by herself, and they said she's malnourished, she's skinny as a rail, and her head is completely shaved. And when the officers come in, they're trying to get her to feel comfortable. And she even finally admits that she's nervous. Okay. So there's 2 kids. And the only reason they knew that is because this young man was so brave and said that my sister is in the house. And so they go and search, and they go and check and make sure that they save this little girl, and they want to make sure there's nothing else in the house. Okay. Next thing that they're trying to do, they're trying to figure out, because Ruby Franke is not from around St. George area, so they don't know who that is. So they go and they find the 8 passengers, excuse me. They find their YouTube channel. The detectives are trying to figure out all this information. They're trying to figure out who Jodi is. Now, what's interesting about this one is, like I said, we're now exploring Jodi's past and who she was and how she got here. And this is where I think the theme of exactly what happened and how we can compare Chad and Jodi together really meshes in, because we have to take a lot of the LDS influence, and we also have to take all the cult leader stuff and mix it all together, because it's literally almost the same exact recipe at the end of the day. So as I'm walking you through the documentary, I'm going to just add in more thoughts, but they find Ruby Franke's daughter. She's 9 years old. So Jodi says she's turning 10, which I think is very weird that she did not call her 9, almost as if she wanted to age her up to sound better. That was just a psychological pickup that I had. I don't know why she specifically said she's about to turn 10 rather than saying her age. But that was, for me, I think that was her justifying her not being a 9, but a 10-year-old. I don't know. And so Kevin gets called to come pick up. So Kevin Franke has been estranged from his family for a long time. Now, in the Ruby Franke documentary, to give us some background, because we watched that as well and covered it on the channel, Ruby had basically had Sherry kicked out of the family, who was her oldest daughter, and then her oldest son, Chad Franke, was also removed from the family and living on his own. And then Ruby also kicked Kevin, the husband and father of the children, out for the same reasoning. So there's a lot of isolation that happened over time. And basically Kevin comes to be a part of it, but he sounds scared, and he doesn't really want to give the police any reason to think that they're in trouble, which meaning Jodi and Ruby. And I think that for me, my first observation is just abuse. He's been abused by these women. Jodi at one point was Kevin's. So this is what's interesting about Jodi. She was a therapist, okay? And she built an empire on therapy. And so she was getting one-on-ones, and she was manipulating the living hell out of these people. And unfortunately, Ruby had hooked up Chad Franke as well to be in her one-on-ones. And then Kevin also had one-on-ones, and he was doing men's groups and things like that. And Jodi was, she's playing this game. Jodi is nuts. Let's just be honest. She's very manipulative, and she was pitching all of this new religious stuff. Okay. So now we start getting into the exposition of Jodi's life, which is a lot of people who were involved in Jodi's life, like her old missionary partner who she spent a long time with. A companion on your mission is somebody that you spend a significant amount of time with one-on-one. Missionaries in the LDS church, men or women, are not allowed to go anywhere by themselves. So as you go on a mission, you literally are assigned a companion, and you two are together 24/7. You live in a house together, and you don't go anywhere without them. They are always within a certain range, because you're not supposed to be alone on your mission. So you get to know somebody pretty quickly. And one of the things that the companion said, she mentioned that Jodi had a way with people and was very, very influential just naturally. And I think this is where the charismatic side starts to come in, because Jodi exudes this more as a cult leader than Chad Daybell ever did. But what they have in common is they take religion and they add new and exciting, and they take you out of the normal rut of normal life, and they make religion, especially LDS religion, because let's be honest, this is all LDS based. They take the LDS church and they start to twist and pull and pull people from the LDS church into a new realm. And I think that that's exciting because they're presenting something new. Religion is usually very boring in a sense that you're not getting like, hey, look at this brand new thing all the time. Maybe boring is the wrong word, but what I'm saying is the traditional side stays the same pretty consistently. And then you have somebody who comes in and says, hey, I have all this new information, or it's cooler than you think, or it's better than you think. And then they start, doing what they do privately, which I think Jodi, when you see someone who's really giving you their life, which I think Ruby was like surrendering more and more to Jodi and wanted that. And then same thing with Chad, Lori's surrendering more and more to him. They know that they can pull strings because they are just naturally manipulated. Okay, are manipulative. So she's marketing herself really well. She's always had an ability to influence people. Okay, so this is Jodi. We're talking about Jodi, not Ruby, right? Ruby's a totally different topic. We need to stay centered on Jodi because this is what this whole documentary is about. Okay, so she starts pulling out this stuff, and then they have two people who were in it, and they said that she wanted to teach people how to be honest, responsible, and humble, and be more Christ-like. So I think it's really interesting when you start to talk about people wanting to genuinely be closer to Jesus. It's interesting that the first thing that people do who are completely opposite of the biblical Jesus are telling people how to be like Jesus. Hey, this is like Jesus. This is where you need discernment and you need to start thinking for yourself, because these cult leaders are very clearly good at telling you what they think they know. And the problem is, I think we have a lot more people who are more surrendering to leadership, and there's not anything wrong with surrendering to leadership. What's wrong is not thinking for yourself. That is what they bank on you not doing. They bank on you thinking that they're a prophet or a prophetess. They bank on you taking their word for things, and they bank on you to come to them with spiritual questions because they have the ability to now manipulate you. So if you're coming and saying, well, how do I do this? How do I become this? How do I become better at this? That's the thing. That's the whole point, is that they now have an open door to you, especially if you're doing therapy. As you all know, therapy is very, very intimate. You're possibly opening up about all kinds of different things. And so if you open up in therapy towards a cult leader who knows your pressure points and knows your vulnerabilities and knows your secrets, they have an ability to truly, truly press down on your neck. Okay. So I want to keep that in mind as we're talking more about Jodi. And obviously I'm comparing it to Chad because it's unbelievably similar the more we go into it. So back to what's happening with the kids. And this is where it gets really, it's not that far off, because yes, there's torture here and they're torturing these children. But what was the next progressive step? You have to ask yourself these questions. The next progressive step was possibly their lives, because at this point, they're already depleting them of humanity. And that's what I see. And this was my biggest fear when I was waiting to find out where the kids were, is that they were being tortured and that they were being held somewhere and that they were locked away. And it's the biggest, worst nightmare you could possibly face, other than finding out that they're gone. But the torture side, and why my heart is shattered in a different way for the Frankies, is that this was a nightmare for me as well. And I felt this. And so it's very personal, and I can't imagine that, because I was there, but I still couldn't ever get there all the way, because it's almost more of a mercy to take a life than it is to torture someone. And I'm just being 100% honest. There's no middle ground there. It's worse to sit there and torture someone. So they go into her house. They go back to the body cams. The police are searching the house still. They don't know who's there. There's nobody else there. They already found Ruby Frankie's daughter, and they're tending to her. They already have her son in an ambulance taken to the St. George Hospital. What they find is that there is so many rooms in this house. I mean, giant. You guys, like I said, we're going to do a part 2 of this. So if you have the time in between now to like Friday, I would suggest watching it. It's about an hour and a half, and it will give you some more context to this house. I might pull it up on here on YouTube if I can, just to show you the body cam stuff. But this house is huge, and it shows you all these different rooms that they're going through. They're searching boats. I mean, it's a giant house, and they find a safe, and they're like, what's the code of the safe? And she's playing dumb. First thing she's doing, I don't know. I've never opened that safe. I don't know what this combination is, whatever. And she's, on the phone with her lawyer. She's telling her lawyer all this bull crap, and, all kinds of stuff, like ridiculous. And so as she's doing that, there's the, what's it called? There's the police. He's not the chief, but I think he might have been the chief. And he's down there and he's talking to them about, the code. And he starts out of nowhere. He puts in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it pops. So we're talking about a door, a safe door into a room. We're not talking about a safe. We're talking about I don't know how much this would cost. Okay. I'm just being 100% honest. I don't know the cost of this kind of room, but it's basically a safe room. And so what happens is he pops the door and they find all of the tools, in a sense. They find the tools of their evilness. They find that all their chains and ropes. And what's really sad and sick, and this is where I want to give full discretion, because I feel like I had the time to prepare to have this conversation with you. So just know that I'm not throwing this out. I had to prepare myself mentally to be able to discuss all of this with you. But they had used a paste, and this paste was cayenne pepper and honey that they were putting underneath. So if you see the young man's wounds, he's bound at his ankles and at his wrists. And with that, he also has this cayenne pepper honey paste that is basically burning his skin. I mean, cayenne pepper is not something you'd want on your skin, but they were creating a paste out of it. So it was literal torture for these kids. And so they find this room, basically the safe room, this torture room of a base of operation inside of this can't open safe. And they find chains and ropes and everything. And it's just, I can't imagine what you're mentally going through, because when the officers and the ambulance arrived, they're already shutting down the emotions. They're there's literally body cam, and they're like, I'm gonna cry, I'm gonna lose my mind, and then one of the guys is like, yeah, I just put my sunglasses on because I can't do this. I can't. He's gonna see me crying, and the last thing you want to show a vulnerable child is that you're scared and that you're upset. And I always go back to this. This is the most important, another really important part. Detectives, officers, all of our medical, EMTs, firefighters, doctors, nurses, they're presented with these on a daily basis. And it's just listening to the emotions flooding the reality of showing up and seeing this little boy, and he's skinny as a rail and he's been tortured, and you just can't even, you're trying to wrap your head and process this. So the first thing they did is they sprung into action, and they went and they found his sister, like we talked about. But the other thing that's really hard is, there's just that acceptance of this is what's going on. This kid's been tortured. Then you find the daughter, and then you go into that room and you see that they have a base of operation. Then it opens that door to, there's been planning, there's been thought behind this. This is an evil intent. This is real life. And these people are hiding these children in this mega mansion with all of these pastes and torture things to bound them and keep them away from society, basically. So I always give a huge shout out to every first responder and everybody who does the job, because no matter what, it is a hard job. No matter what it is, they are faced with things that are traumatizing. And that could be 3 times a day. We don't know if that was the only thing that they saw that day. And so that's a big shout out I want to give to them. This is another thing that I noticed. Another reason why I think we need to discuss this is it's weird because it's Ruby's kids and Lori's kids when we look at it in its totality. But it was both on Chad's property and Jodi's property where they were willing to do or torture or end lives at their property specifically. So I think that's really, really weird, because I'm trying to think of the psychology. Now, just from an unbiased standpoint and whatever the word would be, to zoom out from my emotional side and just look at it from a logical standpoint, the only thing I can think of is that Jodi had a property and Chad had a property physically, a bigger place, and they knew what they were doing. But think about the psychology that you as the person know that that is happening and it's not your kids, but you're telling, right? Think of from their cult leader mind, you're telling the Loris and the Rubies, even if they were willing passengers, okay, telling them that this is the evil that they're going to get rid of or take care of, and we're going to do it at my house, and we're going to keep it a secret at my house, and we're going to hide this evidence at my house. I just think it's very different, and it's very weird that they both did that as the influencers. Now, again, I take nothing away from Ruby, and I take nothing away from Lori. Very clearly, they are just as guilty, and I think mothers are the most guilty when it comes to these situations, because we all know about Ruby's journals. If you guys watched The Devil in the Family, and we covered it again, it'll give you more context if you haven't seen it, but she had journals about the things she made the kids do, the torture that they were going through, and we have to bring up the biggest point here is that they made the kids have demons, and that is the number one thematic place here. Now, we have to talk about that in a minute, because there's a whole religious side of this that we need to touch on, that we need to also understand plays a role into what these people were. So something really interesting came up in my notes, and I'll get to that just in a second. So Ruby shows up at the house. This is in the documentary, so we're going through the body cam as we're flashing between all these things, and she's described as stone cold. So there's no reaction. She gets arrested with Jodi, and they're both being questioned. Stone cold. Again, back to the mentality of what's going on with these people. This is very sociopathic / psychopathic. To do this, I feel like you have to be one or the other. And when we define those things, we are defining a lack of empathy across the board. We're not talking about someone who does something and is really guilty or really worried. I think what we're talking about is more like they don't feel it. They're disassociated, or they don't have empathy. I did see that when they were arrested and they talked and they did these things, they were crying. I think that was more of a ploy and an act, because again, think about not getting caught in these situations. You're torturing children. You're doing all these evil, heinous things. You're locking them in doors, and you're locking them underground, all this kind of stuff. And you have no empathy then. So why would you have empathy later? I don't know. That just doesn't really make any logical sense to me. But back to what else I was going to say. This is where we need to start talking more about the religious side. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about what the LDS church is built like. So the LDS church is more of a man leading his family, which is more biblical, but in the LDS church, in my personal opinion, so please take this with, as this is my personal opinion, that men are favored more in the LDS church and are still in a position more of power rather than equality for the woman, right? Because there is the Melchizedek priesthood, this priesthood that men hold that women do not. We have to bring this up because this is exactly what is so wild, is that Jodi and Chad both presented women with these opportunities of breaking outside of the social norm of being LDS. Lori said that she now had the Melchizedek priesthood, which never has happened in the regular LDS church that I've ever heard of. I've never heard of those things. I think it might have been a thing when the church first was created, but I just don't know. I don't have enough information on that, so I'll have to do more research on that. But again, Jodi was telling LDS women the same thing in breaking the social norms of you don't have to just follow what your husband says and or you are powerful. And the thing is, these are real messages mixed in with manipulation, right? So it's just, we have to bring in what the LDS church teaches versus what they were playing off of from the LDS church. And Chad and Lori both did this, where Chad starts to tell Lori, you're a goddess, which is not an LDS lore thing and not a core LDS belief. You also don't have the priesthood as a woman in the current LDS church. And you also don't, there's the thing I don't understand either. The LDS church is not demon heavy. And when I say that, growing up, I didn't even really understand the demon thing. I didn't understand that just wasn't a principle I was taught. And again, I went to go serve a mission at 18 years old. And so I studied to teach others, and that was still not a big part of it. It was more about the three heavens, which is degrees of glory, which we've spoken about, and things like that. So when we get down to what I think is happening is this idea of taking LDS base and then writing scripts out for what you like and what you don't like, kind of like adding or subtracting from a movie and putting in your own ideals. And people like that because it's new. Now, again, Jodi is everything Chad Daybell wanted to be. Okay. And let's just be honest with that. Jodi had like 500,000 people on her podcast. She had influence. She had courses. She was making stupid money, and she bought herself the big house, and she was, I don't know if she wrote books, but she had real influence in this world, and she had a lot more people looking at her. And again, Ruby Franke had spent time outside of ever knowing Jodi building a similar empire of a mass following. And so you look at like, okay, what is somebody's goal? If their goal is purely followers, purely influence, you have to think about what's going on in their brain, and it has to come down to, my personal opinion is power, right? If you want if that's your only thing, right? You have no other real goals. You want money and you want power. That goes back to Chad and Jodi as well. Now, here's what's really interesting. There was a moment where in the documentary, we go back to Jodi speaking on behalf of herself from how she grew up. Okay. So I want to read that real quick. She was raised in a very, quote unquote, at that time, typical LDS family. Now, again, the LDS church has changed a lot in the decades, right? So like, I would say back in the day, it reflected more of societal norms as it does now. And again, these are my opinions. I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad about anything. It's just the truth of how I view this. I feel like the church has twisted certain parts, twisted certain things to fit the societal norm of the times. So if this was accepted at this time, it's accepted, and then it's no longer accepted, it changes. And so what I mean by that is, like, a perfect example is back in the day, the LDS church did not allow men of color, I think specifically African-American men, but I could be wrong, could not hold the priesthood at all. You could be a member of the church. I think you could do everything else, but you could not hold the priesthood. And that was more in that time, I want to say, where it was societally, we were still fighting for equality. And then once equality happens, now men of color can have the priesthood. And so what I'm trying to get at is that I feel like there's a trajectory of what Jodi is speaking on, is that in the societal norm at the typical time of when she was a kid, it reflected what the church believed at that time and how things were, which, as we know, men were more of the dominant / leader and everything of the house, and the women did their specific job, and they were very locked into a box of what they were allowed to do and not do. And then that just played throughout the family. So the man was the most important, and he dominated the family. So I do think that's how I view it. Okay. I could be wrong, but that's how I view it, because I've looked back into, how society has changed and how the LDS church has changed with society. Right. What she said is that she was raised in 2 different ways, and this is key. This is psychologically key to what we're talking about. She said she was raised in fear, and she was raised in perfection. Okay. Now we need to hit on those pieces, because these are the psychological reasoning. I think people grow up and want to be influential, powerful, and get what they want. And this is what I think stirs this person, because again, we're not born evil like this, where a lot of people are not, I don't believe, are just purely psychopaths from the beginning. There's a lot of studies on this, so please don't quote me. These are just my thoughts. But I think there's usually an influential thing that happens in your life that usually causes more of your tendency of being a psychopath to get turned on, right? I'm not saying there's not little kids who have had some of these behaviors, but a lot of behavior is influenced by religion, environment, everything, right? It's very influenced by how you're raised and things of that nature. For Jodi to say, I felt nothing but fear and perfection. Well, what do you think someone who feels fear and perfection, what do you think they also struggle with? And perfection to me immediately says I'm never good enough. And so at one time I'm going to feel good about myself, and I'm going to be powerful, and I am going to be good enough, and I'm going to be this powerful person that does all these big things. That is usually that idea. And we even see it in pop culture. We have people who are the nerdy guy, or the David and Goliath, where you rise above all the things and the nerdy guy becomes the cool guy, right? It's like, you get a haircut and work out for 6 months and you're the hero, right? It's the idea. It's the whole idea. And we subconsciously see this all the time. People who feel like they have to be perfect never felt like they were good enough. So if you feel like I have to be a perfect person, how can you ever meet that criteria? There is no such thing as perfection. And guess what? For most people, perfection would be subjective to what they think perfection is. You can't be perfect. And even in a religious context, Jesus told us, you can never be perfect. That is why Jesus existed, died, and took your sin on, because you could never be perfect or sinless. Not possible. So she's growing up in this LDS idea where I have to be this perfect person. And that would, to me, would influence a lot of that power trip. And I'm not good enough and I'm unworthy. So actually they do the exact 180 opposite. I'm better than you. I'm more dominant than you. I am now successful. I am going to control other people's lives. That's what I see. And then fear. What does fear do? Well, fear, to me, fear and love are the two most powerful emotions and influential things that can happen to you. If you raise in fear, fear influences people to do things, right? If you're afraid, you're going to do stupid things. Like if you're running away from a bad guy, you're going to slip on your feet. Why would you slip? It's like you're almost so scared that your body doesn't know how to react. And so that's how I view fear running Jodi Hildebrandt's life from the beginning. And it starts with her parents. And this is not to only blame parents, because you can break through this. And that's where the psychological thing needs to be explained. You can break through that. You can change your own trajectory of your life depending on how willing you are to deal with yourself. And it's not easy, and it's not fun, and it's not a good time, but you can completely 180 your life depending on how you choose to pursue your life, rather than always be a product of what you were raised in. Okay. So I just want to make that normal. It's true. You can, it's not easy, and it's going to take a lot of time, but you don't have to grow up feeling that way and then spend the rest of your life as a product of your parents. If you had horrible parents, that's not reflective of you, but don't just accept, well, I'm a piece of crap because my parents said I'm a piece of crap, so I'm going to be a piece of crap. That's just, you don't have to live that way. So I want to hit on that real quick. The way that I also, and this is something we'll get into the next episode because it needs to be explained more, but one of Jodi's very close therapist friends mentioned that her sexuality and sexual things were weird with her. Now, what I remember from The Devil in the Family is that sexual stuff was very, very shunned. Very, very taboo from what I remember from Jodi. And she made Chad Frankie and Kevin Frankie feel very weird about sex. And this is the thing that's really sad when it comes to religion and it comes to all this stuff. There's these influences that make things something they're not. Let's just be 100% honest. Sex in itself is not wrong. Sex with your wife is not wrong. Sex with your husband is not wrong. Sex in general is not a bad thing. What has happened is that it's influenced by different factors. And when the person, it sounds like Jodi didn't have safe sexuality, and so she therefore projected all the people she touched on to be influenced to believe the same thing. And it has to go back to where it's about what they want. So Jodi was not using sex the way that Chad and Lori were, and they were not using that as an influential piece into this whole thing, but it still exists, and I'll tell you why. Because this is also one of the most important parts of your life, is that sex equals intimacy. So if she's not having the love that a human being craves, whether it's conscious or unconscious, sex in itself would be an act of love. It would be an act of connection. It's the deepest, most intimate thing you can do with another human being. And so if she's not having that, if she has strong feelings against it because of her religious beliefs and this and that, that can also influence her more and also influence other people to follow her way. And that can go both ways. You can be hypersexual and have people be hypersexual because you are hypersexual as a cult leader. And then when it comes to, the opposite, if she's like, I hate sex, sex is bad, she's going to tell everybody who's following her and get into their heads in the same thing and ruin sexuality, make it evil. So that's kind of where that part of me is. I'm going to listen more to it, but it's sounding like that's where we're at with it. Now, the last thing I want to hit on before we're done today, and before I see before I just read your guys' chat, you guys are funny, bro. But the religious side of this is really truly just a psychological ploy, right? So I think what's happening is that these people are broken. We've talked about this, but I want to be more specific, not just say the word broken, because again, you can be broken and be fixed. Let's just be honest. It's real. I think that's the whole point of life. No one's perfect. Everyone's broken in some way, but you can be fixed if you try. And so what happened is, I think that what happened is Chad and Jodi never felt like they were enough. They were never validated. They were never, and this does go back to your parents in a sense that if you did not receive the love and the identity from your parents, and I don't know much about Chad's parents, so I can't speak on that, or Jodi's. I'm just kind of going off of psychological stuff that I noticed myself. They seem to not have the ability to look at themselves and realize what they're feeling. Their feelings turn into religion and power and all the things that they crave from their souls, which is, I would say, human basic needs: love, empathy, to be seen, to be heard, to be validated, just normal human things that I think we all crave as who we are. Love being the number one thing. If you are stripped of love, you can change an entire trajectory. And every freaking pop culture villain is the product of zero love, right? Did not get loved, was mistreated, was abused. It's true. It's just reality. When you strip away love from a child, you can really hurt what they think the world is, because they know they have this need and this desire. And it is truly very, very powerful, just as much as fear is. Chad and Jodi themselves were not loved the way that they needed to be. They did not feel validated or important enough. And so they set out in their lives to become more, to lie, and to get what they wanted deep in their hearts. And then they were more and more corrupted over time, just like Lori and Ruby. They are just as guilty. So let's keep that in mind. But they didn't get what they needed. And so they went down the evil path, and then they were willing to inflict pain and hurt others and do these things for whatever gain. Now, I do have to separate that what Chad and Lori wanted seems a little more clear cut to me. Excuse me. It seems a little more clear cut in a sense of like, this is what they wanted. They wanted to be together, and these were their obstacles, and they needed the money. I don't understand exactly what was going on with Jodi and Ruby, because when I look at it, it looks like punishment to me. It looks like they wanted to hurt others, and that they wanted to do these things. They wanted to inflict pain on children. That is just the psychological place that they were at. We'll have to dig a little deeper to really, truly understand that. Again, we can only understand so much because we'll never truly understand the reality and the gravity of all of this. But they wanted the same things. They wanted to be powerful. They wanted to be seen. They wanted to dominate, and they wanted it their way. And they were willing to cast the idea of demons, which is, again, the main theme once again comes back. This is why these kids were tortured. And this is why my sister, my brother, and my dad, and Tammy, and all these other people involved in all of these things are here, is that these religious people are using demons as an excuse to hurt, torture, and murder people. The reality is, if you read the New Testament, Jesus does never once hurt someone who has a demon, kills them, throws them in a fire, none of that. He literally saves them every single time. Every time he saves them. And that's just exactly what the opposite of what these people chose to do. So we're going to dive more into it on part 2. Thank you guys for being here today. Tomorrow, we are going to be covering a very interesting book and something that I've wanted to dive into with you guys for a while. But it is Jennette McCurdy's book, and it is about, and I have the live up for you guys so you guys can go see that and put notifications on. But it's Jennette McCurdy's book, which is literally called I'm Glad My Mom Died. And I remember when I first saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's a punch. Like, you knew that was a punch. And it has a lot more context, and it's going to be very interesting. So we're going to jump into that, and then we're going to be jumping also into part 2 of this. If you get a chance to watch this Netflix documentary, it was made by the same director that directed mine, which I think is very interesting. But you can go watch this. It will give you guys a little bit more context, and we'll jump back into this week. And we have a lot more stuff that we're going to be covering. So thank you guys so much. I'm glad to see you guys. Thank you, and shout out to all my warriors, my chiefs, my mother frickin' ones. Colbert, the meningitis menace, the obese Treese. I don't know what rhymes with obese, but the doctor said I'm obese. I have the paperwork right here. I mean, if you really want to see it, I'm not kidding. They told me I'm obese. And they gave me a whole pamphlet. BMI education. I think I've shown this to you guys. Yeah. So it's just because I'm not 190 pounds. This is what it is. Height and weight does not make sense. I'll tell you that. Anyway, have a great rest of your day. Love you guys. Appreciate you. I will see you tomorrow. And Colbert's out.